So, graduated from Royal Military College, Duntroon in 1984. Spent about a total of 18 years in the Army, most of that obviously in logistics. Except for the back half of my career, I was sent to the Royal Military College of Science in the UK, and then subsequently I was detachment sent to research and development with the British Army, and then on to the US Army before returning back to Australia to what was then the Engineering Development Establishment. Got out of that when I sort of left the Army, usual thing, into one of the big consulting companies around logistics supply chain. We did that, ended up into a manufacturing company that was fairly politically charged. It was in a marginal seat, both state and federally. It was highly politically contentious. So that was a great gig, and it sort of really gave me my exposure then more to political advocacy. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And then I ended up in supply chain and manufacturing-based software for about 10 to 12 years around Asia Pacific. And that sort of fairly much was dealing at the top end of town. Enjoyed that, but like most people, you get tired of living in the plains and the consequences that come with it. And this sort of drifted on, and this sort of ended up in my lap. So, as I said, it's probably one of the best gigs I've had. But in between times, I did my postgrad in supply chain management at Monash. I'd already had a master's in predictive modelling and another one in technology management. Somehow I ended up doing a bit of academic guest lecturing on supply chain related issues at a number of universities. So I've always had that sort of more orientation in the way we look at more of a strategic aspect of transport logistics. It's a peak body for the road transport industry in the state. A bit of a ruptured start again, but historically the old Transport Association actually started with the Fremantle Master Carriers, and it grew into what was then the West Australian Road Transport Association. Like most associations, about 110 years old at the time. There's a bit of a financial hiccup. Unfortunately, that organisation had to be put to bed. Some of the old guard then said, well, look, can we rebirth it? They asked me to come in, can we start a new association up? And that's what we've done. So we've really focused more now on political advocacy and representation of the key issues for the industry. We put it in the sense that, so West Australia doesn't have a lot other, we've got a few ports along the coastal strip, and we've obviously got one single rail line that connects us to the east, apart from the mining rail. Essentially, the state relies on road transport. We've got around 180,000 kilometres of roads in the state, of which only 30% are actually sealed. But when you look at it, the roads themselves are actually an enabler of productivity for the state. If we want to compete on the global market for agriculture, we need both an efficient road system and rail system. We advocate for both of those. But to do that, the efficiency of the road depends on the investment that goes into it, and that's largely been one of the areas where we've had problems. Our sealed road infrastructure is very low. It's like the Territory. We've got a low percentage of sealed roads. But you put it in economic terms. As a state, we generate somewhere in the order of 40% of Australia's exports income. Most of that export income at some point in time is supported by road transport, but carrying it in or carrying out the outputs, but it is supported by road transport. We generate from that about 15% of the national freight task, but when you look at what we actually do relative to the investment put back in, it's very, very poor. And the consequence of that is we end up with a lot more damage to our vehicles, a lot more unsafe roads. That is a cost. That has to be passed through to the supply chain. Given we're a commodity exporting state, that makes our commodities less efficient, less competitive on a global stage. The Kimberley is, what's a Kimberley? About the size of Spain, roughly. I think it's 1,100 kilometres from memory from Broome through to Kununurra. It's got one sealed road right through the middle. Even there, it's still got a stack of single lane bridges. It's got jump ups that are also prone to flooding. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And it's also our main national highway between Perth and Darwin. That needs it. The goldfields needs investment. The Trans Access Road, which the pastoralists and some miners use, it runs parallel to the railway across the paddock. That also is in a poor state of affairs. It's a local government road, but it's unfair on the local government to be given the burden of a road that is incredibly long, that doesn't have too many ratepayers on it. But it is a road that we needed. If we'd had that in January, we would have had an alternative route potentially. We could have bypassed the bushfires. But the road at the moment is in such a state of repair that in places the average speed is 10 kilometres an hour. And one of the transport companies tells me that their average damage per day on that road is $4,000. That's where we start to pay penalties. Well, if you think about it, if you're in a remote community and you have an unsealed road and it's a wet season, you can't get out. So imagine you're trying to run a business there. You can't get supplies in because the road's cut. You can't get stuff out, the road's cut. Yeah, how can you run a business when you don't have access to markets? So roads are fundamental. And if you go back to the US in the 50s, when the US created the interstate network, and I've forgotten the exact figures, but they attributed something like it created an extra 6% on GDP. Right? Roads are still fundamental, the most basic form of connection that people have to market. And we've denied people in the Northwest, we've denied our remote communities that access. You know, there's an element of equality. If we want jobs and opportunity and enable them to grow and prosper, we need roads. It's fundamental. Our regional communities increasingly, they're also in the same boat. If we want to try and develop our regions to grow regional cities, they still need good road access, you know, so they can move around, get their stuff to support their business, but similarly, they can get into the capital city when they need to. You know, roads are critical. The problem we fundamentally face is that roads, along with a lot of infrastructure spending, you know, as it repeatedly comes out, will follow where the marginal seats are, and that is an issue. The composition of our membership is we very much targeted the mid to large companies. So the majority of mid to large transport companies in Western Australia are our members. But we've also got members who use or are heavily dependent on road transport. So one of our members, for example, engages or relies on 170 transport companies to carry their product. So we've got a lot of that stronger support coming into backing up what we're trying to do. In terms of the sector, though, this is always a thing with transport. It's a horizontal sector. So every sector of Western Australian economy, at some point in time, is impacted by road transport, be it from banking, from the cash deliveries, to waste, to removals, to your bulk transport for mines, your agriculture, your refrigerated transport for retail, even your online deliveries to homes. It's all part of the transport task. But each of them is a horizontal segment. And so by bringing it all together, we get a more united voice and we can start to advocate better. Because ultimately we all depend on roads, we depend on the access. We obviously got curfew-based issues, whether you're carrying waste or you're delivering an online delivery from Amazon. You know, we are impacted by the efficiency of the road and the regulatory system that underpins it. We'll start with the urban area. Our fastest growing segment of transport is last mile delivery. And that is, as we want to infill our cities with a greater population, we actually increase the road freight task. Trains don't deliver to households, trucks effectively and light commercial vehicles do. But as we push more people into the city, we also increase the amount of vehicles going into the city, from a transport perspective, to service it, be it servicing a saw, being a delivery of an online piece of equipment that bought from somewhere, and also the extraction. So we're pulling out the wastes as well. That creates a pushback by the community who see a lot of these light commercial, light trucks delivering into their cities, and they go, well, we don't want them. So there's a social licence aspect. There's a disconnect from people in the cities between how they get their stuff, how their lifestyle is supported by road transport, and their perception that there is too many trucks. So we're working hard in that area of social licence and how we get a more progressive view of servicing our urban communities. When we come back now to the regional areas are incredibly underserviced. The road funding into our regions is poor. We've got around about a $700 million backlog in Western Australia in road maintenance, and it's growing. And that obviously translates to cost and unsafer roads. So we're trying to push, for example, in the agricultural sector, our wheat belt. Our wheat belt's under, there's 60 odd councils that depend, local governments that depend on that wheat crop. Road is critical to the competitiveness of that wheat crop and its global competitiveness. So we're supporting the grain growers and those in that industry in getting greater investment into the road networks and the bridges that are like fuses in that network that restrict the productivity of the vehicles that we can put on it. And then similarly, we expand that up into the remote areas. The big one, as you know, is we are incredibly strong about starting to invest in Northern Australia. So at the moment, if we go back to January, in January, all roads to the East Coast were cut. We had a tropical cyclone, Blake, which cut the Great Northern Highway. We had flooding on the Great Central Road between Laverton and Alice Springs. And we had a 2-week bushfire on the Air Highway, which cut all links. We have no roads out of Western Australia. That's ridiculous. We only have 2 sealed roads that actually connect us to the East Coast. So we're strongly working with the Northern Territory about starting to invest in getting the road connections between Alice Springs and Halls Creek, which is a Tanami, opened up. That opens up opportunity for our Kimberley region and our growers in the Kimberley region, and hence road transport, to move that product down to the southeast market. Similarly, we're trying to get the Great Central Road upgraded, and that will give us a connectivity between our mining areas and the mining areas in North Queensland. So if we can get the Outback Way sealed all the way from Laverton through to Winton, that opens it up. We've set out we're apolitical. You know, for example, I'm working with the Greens at the moment on some clean freight initiatives that, you know, are part of our social licence to help remove some of the barriers of access that we're getting. Working with Labor on some of the things about workforce structure and development so that we got a more flexible workforce. You know, the Liberals have got, you know, there's some aspects there around pricing and other things that we're looking at. So we work with all parties on aspects relating to different parts of the transport if they've got an interest in it. So I'll go back, we are very apolitical. In terms of how we work, we try to gain leverage. So our members will come up with an issue, we put it through one of our groups, they come up with an issue. What we try and do is, rather than take it on by ourselves, we'll try and see if we can work out any other interested parties in it, so we can get a mass approach to a single issue. By doing that, we're far more effective. So be it a regional issue, I'll talk to, you know, some of the regional chambers of commerce in that area. If it's an urban issue, I might talk to some of the urban planning people or local governments who are impacted. But by bringing a more collective approach to it, we're starting to get a lot more influence and a lot more effect in the way we do things. Yeah, look, it's a question. Obviously, I think it's about 27% of all emissions are attributed to the transport and logistics sector. We're certainly starting to take it on part of a hydrogen-based initiative looking at clean fuels, or in fact, multi-fuels is the term now. So we're looking at that, we're participating in that. There are some things we're looking at in terms of, you know, how we encourage people to adopt newer vehicles. You can either do that through a regulatory model. Our preference is that the people who have made the investment in the cleaner, safer equipment are given improved access or a productivity offset that helps them pay for it. So it's more of a carrot-based approach. But still, it's an emerging topic area and how we address it. But you know, certainly the climate impact area is something that, you know, obviously we experienced in January with the severing of all road links to the East Coast. Okay, so our position on roads and national security, we obviously have an economic reason from our perspective to invest in the road network in Northern Australia, and particularly giving us more options for getting connection between East and West Australia. We believe, though, from a defence perspective, now that Defence is talking about having more activity in the north, that they should be supporting that. Because ultimately, under whatever continental defence strategy you want to have, us as an industry are going to have to provide some degree of support to their logistics activity. Our industry is the professionals at it. We do this every day of the year, all year round, all right? And as the professionals in that industry, we're saying that unless Defence helps support the road upgrades and the infrastructure, supply chain infrastructure upgrades in northwest and northern Australia, we will not be able to support around-the-clock activities for Defence. They've got to help support this activity. It is in the national interest. The other part, which was from a Defence perspective that we strongly push, is obviously there's a lot of interest in Northern Australia from a Defence side, and certainly the northwest. You know, being ex-Defence, you know, logistics is always the key to any successful Defence strategy. And we're arguing as an industry that our ability to support Defence in northwest Australia is extremely limited by the road conditions that we have. We're highly vulnerable to wet seasons, and that road being cut between Perth and Darwin, and that's regularly cut every wet season. And we've got no alternative but other than go down through Port Augusta and South Australia to wherever we want to go. So we strongly believe that Defence should take a more active role in looking at the strategic value of stealing some of our northwest roads and upgrading them accordingly and making them more climatic proof to the ongoing sort of wet seasons and whatever other things that nature wants to throw at us. I think we've lifted the profile of the industry substantially, and that's a reflection I get back now from the other major business groups and from the government and from a multitude of other government departments. There's an acknowledgement of the role that road transport plays in supporting the economy and the need to actually engage with road transport. So that's one. But more specifically, if we look at something like a specific issue, we had the oversize over mass, we call it, which is the big, large stuff. We had a major national problem on that. We had an incident where one of the heavy haulage trucks was held up for 100 days. When you consider the cost of the piece of equipment was costing the customer $100,000 a day, massive losses. So we led a national campaign on that. We took it through the Deputy Prime Minister, and to his credit, he commissioned a national review, and we're still working through the outcomes of that. So we are able to achieve that sort of more strategic outcomes, as well as the day-to-day operational stuff we do for members. Okay, workforce development's probably the biggest one at the moment. We have an ageing workforce. The average age for some of our line haul drivers, which are the people that obviously run the long distance stuff out of Perth, for one company alone is 56 is their average age. That makes it a highly vulnerable workforce, particularly in the current virus and climate. We're trying to attract new people into the industry. And so we're working on how, as an industry, and there's a number of activities going on, we start to develop a workforce plan that makes it a more attractive industry. And that includes not just recruiting people in, it also includes improving the training of the industry, and also includes some of the roadside facilities, and we're doing there. We're also looking in terms of defence, how we can start to work with defence veterans to help them migrate into the industry. You can't get a better industry to work in. One of the things we've sort of discussed but haven't yet progressed is how do we actually help, particularly the reservists in Western Australia, in terms of some form of interchange. They need the transport logistics expertise we've got. That's been acknowledged. So how can we have some sort of form in there that we can get that all together? So another one we've got to look at is coming back to this thing we've discussed, is about the Northern Australia and developing a road, and we also base supply chain that we can help support not just the economy of Northern Australia and help it grow, but also getting defence there and how we can help support them. So that's very much a major focus. We're working very closely with the NT on that and a number of other groups. The final one is things like protection of jobs. And if I give an example, we have a situation at the moment, we've got heavy manufacturing in around Naval Base, Kwinana area, but because of restrictions of the road network, they can't get the equipment they're manufacturing there up into the mines because there is restrictions are being placed on the network. That means that they're actually looking, or the customer's looking at now manufacturing in China and directly importing into the mining locations. That's a loss of jobs for WA, and it's a loss because the transport industry is restricted. So we're taking a lot more proactive approach there in how we can actually engage on those strategic issues that actually help facilitate and enable diversification in the West Australian economy.